This is episode 548 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, Wally, we're going to start off with EV news, as is our wont these days. Of course, that is because Governor Lujan Grisham is coming after our gas-powered vehicles, and the Rio Grande Foundation has launched keepyourcarsin.com, which is essentially a basic website with a tool in place to allow New Mexico citizens to send notes of their own writing or of a pre-written variety to the Environmental Improvement Board, I should say, to push back against the governor's plans to eliminate gas-powered vehicles. And, this is something that I encourage everybody listening to this to do, as well as sending it to friends, family members. Doesn't matter if they're Republican, Democrat, Independent, as I'm going to mention in just a second. This governor's proposals are not very popular, at least if you believe a recent national poll. But just wanted to hand it over to you, Wally, for a brief comment there.
Yeah, Paul, this EV thing, electric vehicles are here. They will be here for a long time, but how rapidly will they be, shoehorned, rammed into the economy, required, mandated, all of that? That's the question that remains. And, the way, with my apologies to Marie Antoinette, a state like New Mexico that's rural, that is poor, that has problems with crime and education, this seems like this is the let them EV moment. It's like, is this really what we ought to be putting all of our time, money, and attention to? And, it's like, okay, fine, you want to build some electronic vehicle charging stations, do some things like that, fine, go for it, have at it. But this approach that we're taking, and then the other thing is just, if you look at electronic vehicles, they don't have any really short-term benefit for the environment. It takes years and years to earn back all the carbon that's generated doing the batteries and everything. And then we have all of the other problems that if we do this too quickly, our electric system is going to be increasingly fragile and costly, i.e. higher electricity rates. So, who is she doing this for? I mean, I know there's a small group of environmentalists that love stuff like this, but it's very small. And, I think that this will be one of those boomerang policies that, here in a few years, we're like, no, that was not what we wanted to do. And in the meantime, we waste a lot of money, do things very inefficiently, and, upset people in the process.
Yeah. Backing up kind of the statement about lack of interest in electric vehicles. Now, remember, according to a Channel 7 KOAT story from earlier this summer, less than 1% of New Mexicans drive electric vehicles. That number is not going to change very, very quickly. About 2 some odd percent purchase electric vehicles. But a new poll from Yahoo Finance Ipsos shows that 57% of Americans will not buy an EV next. That breaks down to 36% who are not at all likely, 21% who are not too likely, 17% who are somewhat likely, 7% very likely, 7% extremely likely, and 11% don't know, which I love those people. They're always, you got to wonder.
You'd ask them, do you think the sun's going to come up tomorrow? Give us a yes or no. I mean, don't know, whatever. So, I was thinking about this issue, Paul, and right now, because electric vehicles, they're not very good for a primary vehicle, particularly in a rural state like New Mexico. They're good for a second, third, fourth vehicle for a family. They really are vehicles of the affluent. And, if you wanted to ramp up electric vehicle purchases in New Mexico, maybe if we'd work on the economy and have a little more affluence, I have a feeling it would be a much cheaper way to go and a far better way for the overall citizens of New Mexico than this heavy-handed approach. And then, Paul, I do have a question.
Let
for
me
you.
just
Okay.
jump in there because,
Sure.
boy, you talk about a conflict of interest. The governor choosing economic prosperity and pushing the legislature to do the right economic policy just so she can get EVs. I would be willing to make that trade, though.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
if she actually decided, and the Democrats decided that they wanted to make New Mexico economically prosperous and diversified, and the price we had to pay was EVs, I could probably get behind that. Uh, but that's not the trade-off we're making. And real quick before I hand it back to
Sure.
you, this poll did indicate that uh, those of 65 age and older were the least likely to buy an EV, possibly because they've had the longest experience with vehicles. They're less starry-eyed about, kind of new technology. 70% of them said they would not buy an EV. That, of course, is a group that's large in New Mexico, and 60% of those with incomes below 50,000 said they would not buy an EV. And again, that is a large. They're hitting above uh, their weight in New Mexico. So likely, because this is a national poll, there's at least as much, if not more, pushback to the EV issue. You got, like you said, a bunch of liberals in Santa Fe, some in Albuquerque and Las Cruces, and really those are the core constituencies. Of course, those are key demographic Democrat voters to begin with. So, it's just a fascinating move.
Yeah, and then Paul, I have the question. I always do this, and I think this question is now increasingly asked at the federal level. Maybe it's time for New Mexico to look into this a little bit heavier. There's no question that administratively, when the legislature passes a law, there's times that rules and regulations are needed to be put into place to implement that law. But when you're just doing something like this out there, one hand clapping in the wind, where's the law that enables this? And is this even legal at some level to do something that's so dramatic without, a law, i.e., legislative input on this before it happens? So, I am frankly ignorant of whether that stands a chance, that a lawsuit. But again, if the administrative branch can make a rule about absolutely anything without any hindrance of any kind, just get rid of the legislature and we'll just start electing kings and queens and just be done with it.
Shh. Don't give MLG any ideas. Don't do that. That is something she would be all too comfortable with. Well, Wally, we talked about this briefly next issue on a radio show that aired over the weekend in Farmington. But the big announcement that came out Friday from the Department of Energy is that New Mexico is not in the group of 7 that is getting a hydrogen hub, at least not initially. Can you share a little bit about that issue? Because I know that's something you've followed pretty closely.
Yeah, well, there's no secret with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act. There is a lot of money being administered by various agencies, including the Department of Energy. And one of the things that there's money out there for is these things called quote unquote hydrogen hubs. And so projects around the country submitted applications. A lot of them did. It's one of those, anytime that the government's given away money, people will respond with their proposals. And the so-called WISH project, the Western Hydrogen Hub project that was done with basically the Four Corner states, well, actually, it included Wyoming, so let me take that back. But anyway, a number of states surrounding New Mexico with New Mexico put forward a proposal, and it was to support various projects that, taken together, could form the basic backbone for this thing that's called a hydrogen hub. Well, what is a hydrogen hub? It's like, okay, we have natural gas hubs where natural gas lines flow across the country into Oklahoma, and it's dispersed. There's electricity hubs, if you will, where power plants send their power in lots of different places. And the idea here, I believe, is to just based on my reading, is for the production, transmission, and utilization of hydrogen in kind of a systematic way in a region. And so we did not succeed as a state in getting that federal money. And I don't know if this is making lemonade out of lemons. One of the quotes I saw from the New Mexico legislation is, well, maybe most of these projects are going to happen anyway without this federal money. So, and if that's the case, maybe that's what the Department of Energy saw. Who knows? They don't they tell you if you get it, they tell you if you don't. There's not a lot of information about in between times. But in the meantime, there are projects up there in the Four Corners region for various forms of hydrogen. We'll have to see if they continue, but they won't be continuing with a big dose of Department of Energy administered money.
So, a couple things. One is there were about like 37, I believe, projects across the country, 7 approved, and each of them are going to get a little over $1 billion in federal dollars. It's surprising given, the politics of this and the resources available. Of course, we are a state that has a lot of natural gas. That region of the state is certainly a logical place for this kind of hub. If there are any logical places, I question whether the whole hydrogen economy makes any sense whatsoever. But from a political perspective, we're a blue state. Our governor has been in lockstep with Biden from day one, and we have the actual resources. Now, the flip side of that is during the last legislative session, the environmental groups who really dominate Democrat politics and are far to the left even of Lujan Grisham in a lot of ways, managed to convince Democrats in the legislature not to go down the path of passing a hydrogen hub bill. I know this is speculative, but do you think any of those factors, one way or the other, had a major impact on the federal government choosing not to go with New Mexico? I mean, I think they went with one in Texas, and obviously Texas is not Biden country by any stretch of the imagination, but they do have the resources. So any thoughts on kind of the political or logistical reasons why this may have happened? Because it does seem to be a bit of a slap in the face to the governor, quite honestly.
Yeah, a couple of issues, Paul. One is that did the fact, we're going to unfortunately get into the colors of hydrogen again, brown, blue, green. The enviros like so-called green hydrogen, where you use water and electricity to break H2O apart, and you have H, and then the O is not a problem to dispose of. New Mexico's was going to be relying, at least initially, heavily on the blue form, which was using natural gas. And the enviros hate natural gas in any way, shape, or form, just like they used to hate coal, but they've almost got coal to its knees, although it's still fighting in some places. So that's factor one that might have worked against this. Did it? I don't know. And then the other thing is that this is just speculation, but I read a report that was like, that's an interesting point. Maybe that's the case, is that, New Mexico, from a presidential politics election point of view, they're going to vote for a Democrat no matter what. And so it may not even be a what have you done for me lately situation about our governor in New Mexico, but it's like, what can you do for me in the future? New Mexico, you're going to vote for a Democrat president no matter what the situation is. So maybe we spread our money around a little wider, or in other places where may be more electoral votes that are at risk. And again, just speculation, but those are a couple of issues that came to mind, logistically, politically, with regard to the hydrogen hub.
Fair enough. All right. Well, uh, the big spenders in Santa Fe are drooling already over the surplus revenue that we discussed, $3.5 billion likely to be available to the legislature in new money to spend when they convene and in January. And the agencies put out their requests. Man, it makes shopping for kids for Christmas look like positively painless behavior when you talk about what these agencies are looking for. Now, these agencies represent 44% of the state's general fund, so they do not include PED, and quite honestly, I'm not sure exactly what else is left out of the general fund, but these agencies making the requests discussed in the Santa Fe New Mexican represent 44% of the state's general fund, and they are requesting an additional $890 million for the next fiscal year. That would be passed during this legislative session. That is an average increase of 20.5%, according to the Legislative Finance Committee. Charles Sally, director of the LFC, said some agencies are requesting increases of 40 or even 50%. George Munoz, Senate Finance Committee chair and what passes for a moderate these days in Santa Fe, says, my cautionary tale is we've had humongous increases, almost doubling the budget 15 to 20% a year for the last couple of years. It's unsustainable from here forward. The only part I disagree with him on is that it's unsustainable. Because of the oil and gas money, it seems to be perfectly sustainable. The question is this the highest and best use of all of this oil and gas revenue? And you know the answer to that, Wally, is a big fat no. We already have a bloated, unnecessarily large government that can barely spend the money that it has, let alone spend it effectively. And then, of course, $890 million last year. Spending went up about 1.2. That was for everything. If education that comes back with a similar request, and the other agencies, I mean, we're talking annual spending increase of $1.7, $1.8 billion year over year. Just absolutely bananas, Wally.
No, there's no question, Paul. And, a couple of points that, came to mind on this issue for me is one, when the legislature does one-time allocations of funds, for one or two fiscal years, and then it goes away and they have to re-up it, those seem to be the sorts of things that, when the going gets tough and belts need to be tightened, they're able to do with that. When things go into the quote, general fund and they're put into the bureaucracy allocation, those are the sorts of things that, man, it's one of those, that's the toughest cuts to make. So that's one point. And so, the legislature has historically been decent at, I'm not saying they spend the money well, but when there's been extra money, they don't always put it into the ongoing budget. They'll put it in these one-time or short-term sorts of projects. The other issue is that many of these departments in government, what do they need most to fulfill their mission is they need people, and they're doing a horrible job, as probably as bad or worse than the private sector in many areas, getting the people that they need. The Children, Youth, and Families Department, the prison systems, getting police officers, the list goes on. And so, what are we going to do? We're going to allocate a bunch of money to them, and then if they don't get employees, what are they going to do? We're going to be buying gold-plated office furniture, and government budgets tend to be spent because I guess that's the rule. You got to spend it if we allocate it to you. So those are a couple of issues I have, but in the big scheme of things, where are these funds needed? If you look at it from a macro point of view, the area that needs improvement, and again, it's not always money, just money, but the healthcare system, rural in particular, is extremely short of people. The bureaucracy in Santa Fe doesn't seem to care much about that. You know, we have education and crime. They don't seem to care much about that. There are real needs and real issues that need to be addressed, but I'm not sure just generically bloating up the bureaucracy in Santa Fe is going to get us very much as a state. It sure hasn't over this period of run up of growth of the oil and gas revenues.
The only thing I would disagree with you on is that you said need when it comes to government. Yes, there are areas of government, I think we can all agree, where we do need people to work, law enforcement and the prisons, etc. But a lot of what we see in our government is due to either bloat or because, like teachers, for example, because work conditions, regardless of pay, are not where they want them to be. They lose teachers either to private options or other careers or other states, and government just does a bad job across the board when it comes to all these things. But
Yeah. And Paul, just real quick on that point, there's a lot of times the public schools are losing teachers to alternatives that don't pay anymore.
Or less.
More or less. So it's not always just the money. It's the,
Right.
it's the mission and how that's being implemented. And then, Paul, I remember way back when one of the first things that I ever worked on with you, and this has been 100 years ago, was the crazy laws on the books in
Oh,
New
yeah.
Mexico. Well, believe me, New Mexico still has a lot of those. There's still a lot of things that we do that we have in agencies and in bureaucracies to do things. My personal favorite, and some people may vehemently disagree with me, is that if you use the word pinon in your restaurant, like piñons, pine nuts, they have to come from New Mexico. Well, there's a person in the state bureaucracy that goes around to restaurants, and if you have the word pinon on your menu, you have to show them that those pine nuts are, in fact, the pinon variety that came from New Mexico. It's like, that's just, that's a little bit out there in left field, but believe me, there are a lot of things like that in state government as is, much less adding, 20, 30, 40, 50% more.
Yeah. So not a surprise given all the things we talk about, but I did just find this particular chart online from the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. Now, the chart itself is 2021 state public welfare spending per capita. The actual point of the chart is look at how much California spends per person relative to Florida. Hint, it's more than double per person. California being among the most generous, Florida being among the most frugal. And, obviously people are moving in droves to Florida. People are moving away from California. I don't have to tell anybody that. And in expressed preference, people move towards, generally speaking, states that aren't so generous on welfare but have more free market approaches to the economy. But unfortunately, at least in New Mexico and some other blue states, increasing the generosity of welfare spending seems to be politically popular with the population that inhabits the state. And New York has the very most generous welfare benefits, followed closely by New Mexico. Now, those top four, New York, New Mexico, Massachusetts, California. One of these is not like the other. New York, Massachusetts, California, among the most wealthy and high cost places in the entire country. The fact that New Mexico is number 2 really highlights that our welfare spending per person is out of control. We're not a high cost state to live in.
No, and then again, this is not the study of the data in detail, but what are we seeing in New Mexico is we're seeing a very low labor workforce participation rate because we have very high welfare. Are those two things related? Boy, are they? I bet they are, but it's one of those, I haven't seen the study, but the fact that New Mexico is so high, and as you say, in a relatively low-cost state compared to the others, probably bears some looking into. And, if we look at what happened, I'm old enough to remember when Bill Clinton reformed welfare and what positive benefits that brought to the whole country, including those people that were coming off of welfare over the long term. So maybe New Mexico needs to take a look at that.
Absolutely. We need to improve our workforce. We need to educate our workforce, and we need to incentivize people to get into the workforce. All of those can be true and are true at the same time. Politically, some of them, they're all difficult in their own way, but they're absolutely essential to improving New Mexico overall. And dovetailing right into the old education issue, which is obviously at the very core of what we do at the Rio Grande Foundation. New York Times, their morning update email, which I highly recommend people subscribing to, partially because it's free and you don't have to give the New York Times any of your money, but it's actually a pretty good email. They did a study, if you will, of DOD schools, Department of Defense schools, and pointed out that DOD schools are the best performing schools in the nation. This is according to the NAEP, which of course is where we leave our, we use those data points. And sadly, but realistically, when the New York Times reports DOD schools at the top, well, you got to report who's at the bottom. And you get one guess and one guess only as to who's the very bottom in reading, who dropped among the most. So there's performance, which we are at the bottom of, and then the drop, which we're also not doing particularly well. But New Mexico is at the very bottom in 8th grade reading, 8th grade math as well. We are at the very bottom of both, and math in particular really suffered tremendously during the time period included in the New York Times article 2013 to 2022. Kudos to the DOD schools, kudos to other high-performing school systems, and of course, New Mexico needs desperately to reform its educational system, but we're still waiting and we're still pushing for Santa Fe to do that. And obviously, this is all tied in with the previous discussion, although right now, as we have pointed out numerous occasions before, not having a high school diploma even is not really a deterrence to finding a job. If you are motivated and your best bet in life is to get a job and keep a job and grow within that job, there are plenty of respectable jobs available for people who don't even have a high school diploma. The unfortunate thing is that our welfare system is generous enough to the point where they tend to, a lot of people just go with that rather than finding the job and sticking with that and growing within it and maybe completing their education as well.
Yeah, and Paul, excellent point. And the whole thing about we are not last in spending on education, we're last in attainment on education. So they tend to always talk about the resources in, not the success of the education system. And when it comes to workforce, one of the things that we learned so many decades ago is that when you have very generous welfare benefits and you get people being used to being on welfare, it's hard to get them back in the workforce. I don't think it's too big of a stretch to say. I think at some level it's the same kind of psychological impact that we have. Why are we having such a tough time education-wise, even worse than the rest of the nation? Well, we were shut down longer and stronger in COVID, but they also show that once you've been on welfare a really long time, it's tough, really, really tough to get back off of that. So, two kind of issues that have maybe similar, not exact, but similar underlying factors really hitting the state of New Mexico in a big way.
Undoubtedly, Wally. Yeah. So, kind of running with this theme, I believe last week on the show I mentioned that I'd done a little critique, if you will, of Senator Bill Tallman's. He's a Democrat state senator from the Albuquerque area. We had he had expressed frustration in a opinion piece about various points of planning. We talked about replacing oil and gas revenues, education, and capital outlay, and how his party, let's be honest, his party does not do a very good job. We didn't talk about this. Well, we'll go into it here. Uh, and whenever Democrats complain about uh, poor outcomes associated with Santa Fe, it always makes me roll my eyes because, of course, these are the people that have been in charge for 90 plus years. But to his abundant credit, I reached out to Senator Tallman, just sent him an email and said, hey, we have some ideas on some of these areas, and I'd love to talk to you about them. Well, I got a call out of the blue from Senator Tallman and spent a half hour talking to him. And I don't want to go into all the details of our conversation, but we did center on education, which is one of the areas that he expressed a great deal of frustration. And let's just say that I think a lot of Democrats, and he's not the only one I've had this discussion with, do not think that New Mexico parents and families, the poverty issues, Mimi Stewart's talk, we just don't know how to educate poor kids. I think there is a lot of resignation among a lot of our leaders. They don't think that we can actually get the outcomes that we all think we want in New Mexico. They think the parents don't care, and they don't think that the their willingness to send their kids to school, and the truancy issue, all of that, they seem to believe that it's nothing we do will work. And I don't know what's more frustrating to me, the idea that too many of our Democratic leaders are bought and paid for by the unions, or that they don't think that there is a way to actually turn around our education system. But both are frustrating, but for different reasons.
Yeah, no question, Paul. And, want to just do a shout out to my psychology professor from college. So,
Wow.
New Mexico really suffers from what I believe, what you described, it's learned helplessness. In psychology, a state where a person has experienced a stressful situation repeatedly and they come to believe that they're unable to control or change the situation, so they don't try, even though opportunities for change become available. I think that encapsulates where New Mexico is. It's like, well, we tried this and then we tried that and nothing worked. And so we're not even going to try to address these problems anymore. And it is interesting that, part of that is, and believe me, social media and, comments on websites, you got to take all of those with a grain of salt. But New Mexico has a pretty strong, well, if you don't like it here, leave. If you ever bring up anything that is negative that about the state, particularly in the case of the Rio Grande Foundation and most of the things that I'm reading, these are things that I do believe really can make a difference. But people are saying, no, you can't even complain about that. Just leave. This is how it's going to be in New Mexico. So, yeah, I do think that is pretty insightful from Senator Tallman. And, what is it going to take to change that? That is a good question.
Well, I can tell you what policy would help. Arizona's education savings accounts, which are kind of the gold standard of the education reforms put forth by groups like Rio Grande Foundation. Now, this is a brand new program in effect just this school year. The ESAs are being taken up according to a new chart that I found out there by parents in some of the most impoverished school districts in the state of Arizona. And it's not a surprise, I think, but a lot of people automatically assume that poor parents don't care that they don't have enough information to choose the educational option for their child that makes sense. And the reality is that if you don't give them that chance, they're not going to uh, be able to make that decision. It's kind of expecting them to make a decision without giving them a choice. Well, this chart shows that these high poverty areas, and I don't know school districts in Arizona from a hole in the wall, but San Carlos United, 37.4% child poverty rate. That is one of the highest in the state. Something around 17.7% is the statewide average. That is a high adopter of these scholarships. Colorado City, 33.6%, Fort Thomas United, 27.7%. So these are high poverty areas that are taking advantage of the education savings accounts in Arizona. Now, ESAs are way, way off in New Mexico, given the politics of this state. I do not believe that Democrats will disavow their unions and go with them. But, let's just say that we're going to do some work on Senator Tallman, and we're going to see if we can at least move the needle with one Democratic senator. And I don't know that you can get enough of them in order to actually get the policy implemented, because if you get momentum, you will see the unions get very threatening, and most Democrats are getting checks from those unions, and they tend to not be willing to stand up against them. But it would be nice to have a education reform champion in the legislature, and we'll do our best to try to educate some of the folks that are there. Obviously, it's up to the voters to change who is there longer term.
Yeah, and Paul, you can and you may call me naive, but I believe that education reform can happen with the unions. You have to almost believe that unions want the quality of education to be poor to say that there's no changes that can be made within the current system in New Mexico with regard to union controlled and dominated public education. And, I personally don't believe that, but I could be wrong. But the point is, we have a huge issue here in New Mexico. And, there are people who are even, who are Democrats who are starting to speak the truth. And I'm seeing that a little bit more than I have in the past many, many years, people being able to talk about this publicly.
Yeah. And real quick, we have some at City Council, 3 members who are putting forth a proposal, so actual council legislation that would make so-called free buses permanent, which is a idiotic idea. Tammy Feeblecorn, Pat Davis, and Clarissa Pena introducing that at a time when the partially because of the lack of ability to find bus drivers, they are shedding routes or cutting service on those routes. That's phenomenal, and just highlights again poor basic decision making, at least by these 3 counselors. Now, 3 counselors doesn't get you to the proverbial promised land, and it's disappointing to see Pena putting her name on such a harebrained scheme, but that's still only 3 counselors with the likely support of the mayor. So hopefully that never happens. What needs to happen is that we need to go at least put a nominal fee back on the bus system, and preferably to increase that fee, because we're suffering in this city from crime induced by the bus system itself, and that's not a good place to be.
No, Paul. And when you have a good that is normally charged for, and then you treat it as a free good, there's no price of any kind, you get some weird distortions. And this is one. And isn't it ironic that that by making the bus service free, that's probably long term going to create the end of the bus system, taken to its illogical conclusion, because nobody's going to want to be a bus driver if it's just a bastion of crime and is the shoplifting transportation network. You know, people who could ride it to work or to the store or whatever have largely already said and will continue to say, nope, I'm going to do something else.
Yeah, and just a quick note in another Albuquerque kind of, you can argue bus related. No part of this city is better served by buses than Central. Now, Central's got problems that date back to way before the ART came through, but ART certainly did not do what people claimed it was going to do on Central. But another business is closing its doors on Central. The Walgreens at Central and San Mateo is closing. That's on top of the Walmart that closed several months ago. So this is
in the very same area. So.
Very same area, yeah. And one other quick note from the city of Albuquerque is that Monday night, the majority on city council voted to defer the decision on the United Stadium lease. Our big concern remains, and we haven't seen any changes to the lease, although I'd like to see them, something to the effect of future costs, especially cost overruns, because I believe we have a lowball price from the team in terms of what they can actually build the stadium for. Any improvements to the stadium in the future, both of those need to be paid for by the team. They are going to defer that until the new council is elected, because obviously we have a handful of people on council that they could switch or change in the upcoming election. Interestingly enough, the 5 who voted to defer, Basan, Grout, Dan Lewis, Pena, and Luis Sanchez. I believe Basan is the only one of those that are up for election. She's up for re-election. Some of the others, including Pat Davis and Isaac Benton, not to mention Trudy Jones, those are all people who are going to be leaving. So I think it is sensible to not have a so-called lame duck city council making these big decisions for the future. So we'll have that in a future time, that discussion and debate at City Council. So thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.